Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time to get started. I can still see some people come in, but it's 4 p.m., so we'll get going here. Welcome to the, I believe, 4th webinar of the summer school series. This one is about pdfToolbox and more specifically about a new feature in pdfToolbox 8 that is called Place Content. And we have a relatively full webinar today, I think, because this is a topic with some easy sides, but also some more technical stuff that I want to cover. So we'll get going right away. If you have any questions in your GoToWebinar control panel, there is an area to ask those questions. More than likely, I will only get to them at the end of the webinar. But feel free to enter your questions in there. If I notice something while I'm talking that I can easily answer, then I'll do so. If not, I'll come back to your questions at the end of the webinar. If you have anything specific that you want to talk about, then just send me an email afterwards and we can discuss in more detail. So, place content, and what is this about? Well, this is the agenda, more or less. As always, I've tried to keep the presentation relatively short. I'll have a short introduction about the place content topic. Then we'll talk about some easy stuff to do, and then some more, I don't want to say difficult, but some more complex stuff to do, and then there's time for wrap-up and questions. But let's get started with some introduction. What we're talking about, like I said, is the place content functionality inside of pdfToolbox 8. But we actually also have to talk about pdfChip. A couple of months ago, Callas introduced pdfChip as a new product, and it is actually that technology that we had already seen inside of pdfToolbox 7 template reports, or custom reports as they're called there. It's that same technology that we now see used also in these place content fixups. And there are easy and hard fixups or complex fixups, and we'll talk about both of those in some detail. But before I go there, let's not forget that there are other ways to add content in pdfToolbox as well, ways that have been there for quite a while, and I've listed some here. The imposition engine allows you to add content and actually compose different pieces of a file. On the larger sheet, you have overlay, you have add as layer. If you look through the switchboard in pdfToolbox, you'll see a number of different ways to add content already. And in some cases, especially for easy things that you want to accomplish, those might actually be easier than the fixups for place content. So don't forget that you have that functionality in there, and before you start to do something really, really complex, see if you can't simply accomplish it by that overlay or add layer functionality or something like that. But that's just a side note, because we really want to talk about the place content fixups today. And there are 4 of them. If you look in pdfToolbox 8 and you go to Fixups and create a new fixup and type in place in the type of fixup search field, then pdfToolbox will show you place barcode, place content on page, place page number, and place text. So 4 different fixups that all have their specific use. Place text, as the word implies, adds static text to a PDF document, but it can also use variables. And because it can use variables, you can actually make it quite dynamic in an automated workflow. Then you have place page number, which also adds text to a PDF, but specializes in adding page number. So the options there are more geared towards adding page number information to a document. Place barcode, which relies on the barcode library now also integrated in pdfToolbox, and that library lets you add over 100 barcodes. It's actually a lot more, but I keep getting confused about the number. It's definitely more than 100. Adds more than 100 barcode types to your document. And that can also be used in a dynamic way and use variables to pass the text that you want to encode in the barcode. And then you have place content, and that's the what I called the full bananas. That's the complex fix-up that lets you use generic HTML templates or snippets or whatever you want to call them. And that's the one that comes closest to what you also have in PDF chip that converts those HTML snippets or templates into a PDF document by itself. So that Fixup place content uses the same technology. It takes an HTML template and then it converts it into PDF and adds that to the document. So for Fixups, and like I said, the first three are actually quite easy. Easy in the sense that they're Fixups, which means that you only have to configure, for those three at least, you only have to configure properties. And there's quite a lot of properties in them, but still each of those properties is relatively simple. And I have a short list of what types of properties you see, but I will look at those in a second in the demo. Now, they're Fixups, and you know that Fixups can be added to a profile. That's the normal way of using them, either a profile or a process plan. And because you can then use such a profile in all flavors of pdfToolbox, whether it is desktop, server, CLI, SDK, that means that those new Fixups are available across the line. And when I talked about using variables in these Fixups, for example, of course, that makes most sense if you start using them either in server, but specifically in CLI and SDK. So while those Fixups are very simple, very easy to use, through a profile, you can still use them in all of the different flavors where you have pdfToolbox available. Now, let's hide the presentation for a second and go to pdfToolbox. And then what I have opened here is the Fixup window, and I'm looking at what I marked here as favorites. So this is not the full list of Fixups, but in here you can already see a couple of those Fixups that I've created. What I will actually do is go into Create New, and that opens up my whole window with Fixups. And then when I type place, you see the content that I also had in the presentation. So place text, place page number, place barcode, and then the last one and most difficult one, place content. Now let's start at place text. You can see that it's quite a number of properties that you have there. There is the text that you want to add. You can specify which font you want to use. You can specify a font size, horizontal and vertical offset. You can specify the positioning of the text that you're adding in relationship to a page box. So I could say add that to the trim box and use the lower left corner, that's that one. And then I could specify that I want an offset, and if I don't want to think about it, so let me do it in millimeters. And if I say 10 millimeters, I have an offset of 1 centimeter to the right-hand side in this case. So the text, the font size, positioning of where the text is going to be, I can put it at an angle. 45 degrees would be in relation to the page, so that would be actually slanted on the page. And then I have the ability to create that new text on a layer, and if I want to do that, I have to specify the layer name. And I also have the ability to create that text as a spot color. So here I specify what the CMYK equivalents are, and if I also want it as a spot color, again, I need to add the name of the spot color that I want. Now, I'm using a bogus name in here. You could just as well figure out the Pantone equivalents of what you want, then add the Pantone equivalents here, either in CMYK or, for example, in LAB, and then specify the name of the Pantone color in here. Tint is also possible. If I want that at a 50%, then I can do that as well, and I can specify that I do not or do want it on overprint. Now, that's a lot of properties that you have, and you'll see that for the other fixups, that's the same thing. Place barcode has a even slightly longer list because of the fact that it has more information for the barcode itself. Place page number also has a long list. So each of those have a number of properties that they allow you to set, but in essence, what happens here is relatively simple. You have the ability to specify either the page number that you want to add, the text that you want to add, or the barcode that you want to add. And because you can specify everything in terms of positioning, rotation, color, font, and so on, you can make that very specific to the text that you're adding to the page. Build that into a Fixup, put it in a profile, and run that on your PDF documents. Now, one of the things that people often miss is that these types of Fixups, and there are lots of Fixups that actually have this little minus and plus sign at the bottom right. And that minus and plus sign allows you to add multiple instances of the same Fixup. So if I'm looking at place text, I can click on plus, and that gives me another area where I can add information for place text. So I could say at the top it needs to be preview, because that's what I'm going to do in the center of the document, for example. So I could put that, what would make sense, center of page, and then perhaps at the bottom I also want to put some other text, and I'll call that document name, and we are going to put that next to the trim box, and then at the lower right corner perhaps. So by using that plus and or the minus sign, I can see how many different pieces of text that I want to add in one Fixup. You don't have to necessarily create a process plan where you have multiple of these Fixups. You simply do plus, and that will add all of the information that you're that you want in one go. If this looks very annoying because you have so much information and the list becomes too long, you can always switch to list view. In this case, it's also not perfect because you have a long list of properties, but list view gives you more of an Excel type of view, and you can add as many items as you want. And perhaps the overview is a little bit easier in this case. That's not specific for this place text Fixup. It is something that is available with most Fixups in pdfToolbox, and actually can make your life a lot easier if you want to multiply the number of instances for a particular Fixup. Now, let me switch back and let me look at this document name. Of course, it does not make sense to add document name as a fixed word on here. What would make sense is to have a way to add this in a variable way. And once we talk about the difficult Fixup, place content, you'll see that there are many different ways you can accomplish what this says here. But even for place text, as I mentioned, you can use variables, and that means that instead of using a static piece of text, I could click on this orange button here, and that allows me to insert a variable in that field, and I could call that variable document name, for example. The default value could be that's what is going to be used if I don't pass in another value in the end. So I could take that the same as what I had originally. And then the, I'm actually wrong here, the internal name should be there. So this is the internal name for the variable that you can then use from the CLI or from server or from SDK to change what that particular variable will have as value. And this is a label that is used in the desktop version. So I would have to call that document name, and that's it. And by saying OK, that instead of having that simple text in there, now indicates that there is an actual variable defined. And if I go through with that, I will get something like this one here. This one says place job ID, and that is actually one that is based on a variable. You can see that because of the 3 little dots that you have. Same with the one for the barcode. Same with these here. So as soon as you have these 3 little black dots, there are variables used in there, and that means that when we run this on a document, so if I go into demo documents and we open something up, it doesn't really matter what we take. So if I have that and I say place barcode and fix, the first thing that happens in the desktop, as you can see, is that I get a dialog window that says place EAN13 barcode. So that's the name of the Fixup, and then this is the label that you can add in that dialog box for variables that appears when you click on the orange button. And this gives me a value. If I now replace that value with something else, the barcode is going to be added with that particular information. If I don't do anything, then it is simply the old, and I'm actually not sure where it is going to add that, in the center of the document in this case. So if I don't change the variable value, then it's simply going to use whatever was in the Fixup and add that barcode information to my document. And what it did here, this is an example, what it did is simply add the barcode on all pages of the document. Now, I'm not going to spend too much more time on these easy to use Fixups because I think they're easy enough to figure out by yourself. So the only thing you have to do is go into create new, here, create new Fixup, and then you specify place in the search field, and that gives you the 4 Fixups that you can use. And the easy ones, once again, are place text, page number, and barcode. Okay, so much for that. Let's go back to my presentation for just a second. Now, then you have that 4th one. So we looked at the 3 easy ones, and then you have that 4th one. And that 4th one really uses templates or snippets based on PDF chip technology. And that means that you can use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and also that there is additional access to the document that you're processing. How does that work? Well, if you look at one of those snippets, and actually I'm better with products than with presentations, apparently. I'm going to go back here for a second, and I'm going to choose this one, which is place ink information, and do edit. And you'll see that this one is based on place content on page. So this is, in fact, the more difficult Fixup, if you want. And what I want to show you before we look at the snippet itself, or at the HTML itself, is how this works. Well, the way it works is that you have a limited number of properties in the Fixup. Once more, you can add multiple instances if you want. But you have a limited number of properties in here. But you have an HTML folder, and this gives you a list of those snippets that I have on my system in this case. And you can say open folder with configuration files, and that opens up a folder on disk, and that's somewhere inside of your preferences. And that folder contains each of those HTML snippets. So that's what we'll be talking about in the presentation. Now, that folder for a snippet contains a number of very, very useful files that you have to understand. The first one is called manifest.xml. And if you've ever looked at how the custom PDF reports or template reports work in pdfToolbox 8 or pdfToolbox 7, then you'll remember that there is also a manifest.xml file in there. And it serves the same purpose. That manifest.xml file is used to communicate with pdfToolbox. So if you place that file in your folder with HTML, then pdfToolbox will begin by reading that manifest file, and then based on what you have in that file, it may decide to do additional work for you and give you additional information. We'll come back to that. But that means it's an important file because it can be used to request information that you don't automatically get because it would take too much time, and we don't always want to run it if you're not going to use it in your snippets. That's the first file that is important. Then the second one actually that I want to point out is index.html. And index.html is exactly what you would think. It's the main HTML file that pdfToolbox looks for, and that will be converted into PDF. So this is where stuff starts. Once pdfToolbox has read your manifest.xml file, it will use the index.html file to start the conversion into PDF. And any other files and folders that you put in there will be used only when they're accessed from your index.html file. So this really behaves like a website. You have an index file, and if that index file refers to JavaScript or CSS or images or other PDF files or whatever in there, if your HTML file refers to that, then pdfToolbox will use it. If it doesn't, then you can still put those files there, but they will not be used by anyone. It's always that index.html file that is picked up and converted. And then there is this folder that I skipped, which is called callus_temp. And that's actually a very important folder, and we'll come back I'll show you exactly why as well. But it's a very important folder, even though it contains temporary information. You can basically empty that folder or even remove that folder itself while you're using that Fixup. But you'll see that as soon as you run the Fixup once, that pdfToolbox is automatically going to recreate that callus_temp folder. And in there, it will write pdfchip.log, and that's an output log. This can be very, very useful because pdfToolbox will log errors if it runs into errors with your snippet, with your HTML. And B, you have a specific way in JavaScript to write to that log yourself. So while it might be hard to debug what's going on inside of a snippet, at least you have a debug log function to write to this pdfchip.log file, and that shows you what the conversion engine runs into while it's converting your snippet. So that's very important. And also important, and perhaps even more crucially important while you're developing your snippets, is that there is a file in there called callus.docInfo.js. And when you open that, this one too will be created the first time that you use the Fixup. When you open that, you'll see that it's JavaScript. Technically, it's a JSON object, but that's saying as much as saying that it's a JavaScript object. And that JavaScript object contains information about the file that you're adding information to. So I open a PDF called test.pdf. I run my Fixup on it, and what will happen is that pdfToolbox will generate this callus.docInfo.js file, and that will show all the information from my test.pdf file that I was processing. And why is this important? Well, a lot of the information that you need to create a good HTML snippet is actually information that you will get from that JavaScript file. So if you make a new Fixup, the first thing that you can do is create an almost empty index.html file. You can make it or you should make it valid HTML, but you can leave it empty so that it doesn't add anything to the document. But create that HTML file, then create a Fixup that uses that snippet folder that you're developing, and Callus will automatically write that log file and the DocInfo file into the temp folder. And that will show you what the structure of that JSON file is and which information you can get out of it and how you can get that information out of it. So that can be very important. Now, of course, I'll also show you a number of example snippets and show you that there are actually quite a few helper routines that we provide in those sample snippets that you can simply use and that make it much easier to work with that JSON object. But it's still important to know that it's in there. Now, and this is an incomplete slide in the sense that I also want to talk about this when I actually show you a number of these snippets. But you have to realize that there are two main strategies when you're creating such an HTML snippet. The first one is to create something that is fixed size. Let's say that you want to add something to a PDF, which could be a piece of text, it could be an image of a penguin perhaps, or something else. But what you want to add is relatively small and it's fixed size. Then you can create a fixed size snippet, an HTML file that will generate a fixed size small PDF document and then position that using the properties of the Fixup. Now, what do I mean with that? Well, if I go back to pdfToolbox 8, and if you look at this, well, first of all, I can select the snippet, of course, and let's say that this is one of those snippets that is small. Contains one image that I want to add. Well, then I can have pdfToolbox convert that HTML into PDF. That gives me a PDF file of, for example, 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter, and then I can use these positioning controls to place that 5 by 5 centimeter PDF file on top of the file that I'm processing. How? Well, just as before with the simple fixups, I could set this to center of the trim box basically, and then say I want to add whatever the conversion result is from the snippet on the center of the trim box. That's what is going to happen in that case. And in many cases, for many things that you might want to add to a PDF document, that is probably sufficient. If I create a snippet with a fixed size page, like a 5 by 5 or whatever the size is, a 5 by 5 centimeter PDF page, then these controls simply allow me to position it somewhere on the document. And that could be in the center, it could be in the lower left or the upper left corner of the document, wherever you want to position it. But that's exactly what's going to happen in that case. You can still add a rotation, and I can still add it on a layer that I want, so that it can be toggled on or off easy enough afterwards, for example. But that's a very easy way to position these things on top of a PDF document. That's not good enough for everything. Let's say that you want to add the document name. Let me give you an example, actually. Let me hide this. We'll put this away, and I'm going to use, where are my demo files? These are the snippets. So I'm going to take the same demo file, I think, that I created before, and we're going to say, I believe it's this one, fix. Again, this is one with a variable, but I'm not going to change the variable name. Yes. Okay. So what happened here? Well, I used a fixup. The fixup is based on an HTML snippet. And that fixup added the text that I specified for document ID on the left-hand side of my PDF. And it added a barcode that incorporates the same information. You see it better when I zoom in. The same 12340 information as a barcode. So here I have a snippet that positions something on the left-hand side and something on the right-hand side of the PDF that it's working on. And you cannot accomplish this with a fixed size HTML snippet. Why not? Because if the page size of my document is different, the positioning of these would have to be different as well. So actually what I've done here is a second strategy, and that second strategy is to create an HTML snippet that resizes itself automatically to the size of the page that it's adding information to. Not to the document, because a PDF document, as you well know, may have pages that have different sizes. I could have an A3, an A4, and an A5 page, all part of the same document. So it cannot look at the size of the PDF, whatever that would mean. It really has to look at the size of each page and then does this positioning trick based on the size of each page. And it's a little bit more complex from a snippet point of view, this variable size snippet. It's a little bit more complex to make that, but it's also a lot more flexible. And again, I'll show you this in a little bit more detail and show you that you actually have ways to use predefined JavaScript code to make your life easier again. Okay. So let me close this. And what I want to talk about to show you some of the principles is the one I was already referring to, add ink information. And I think you've seen that demo, but for those of you who weren't in the introduction webinar for pdfToolbox 8 that is, what I did there was I actually had a PDF document. In that PDF document, I used a first fixup to add some white space, as I have here. So I have this white space created on the right-hand side of the PDF. And then I've used this template based fixup called place ink information. And if I run that, it adds ink information to the right-hand side of the document. Okay, so in some way, in some magic way, it figures out what the actual inks are that are used in this particular document, and then it adds all of these patches, one patch for each spot color and process color used in the document. And it's obvious that there are a bunch of spot colors in here, but if you want, I can show you the process separations to show you that there are also process separations in this particular document. The barcodes are actually set in process color, CMYK. Okay, so it added all of that information, and now the question is, how do you accomplish that? And in order to see that, we need to go back to my templates in this case. So I have these snippets here, and let me open ink information, and let's have a look at what happens in there. You recognize the structure that I mentioned in my presentation. You have manifest, the main HTML file, a bunch of folders that I used to keep things tidy, CSS information, JavaScript, fonts, and then I have the folder Caras temp, which was automatically created by pdfToolbox with those two files in there that I already mentioned as well. So let's look at what is in here and see if we can understand what happens. First of all, I have this manifest file, and as you can see, this manifest is nothing more than a relatively simple XML document. And in there, it has one node called resources, and in resources, you can specify a number of commands if you want for pdfToolbox. You actually don't need that manifest.xml file. If you don't want this information that is talked about here, then you can simply omit the manifest XML file, and pdfToolbox will do default processing without generating any of this information. Now, there are three pieces of information that you can add, and I'm going to talk about two of them, and then the third one we'll talk about in the next template. But the first one is ink information. If I want to have a list of all of the inks in the document, a correct list of inks, then I need to insert this node here, ink info. That's all you need to do. You add that in here, and if you do that, pdfToolbox will pre-process your PDF document, the PDF document that you're adding stuff to, and it will make sure that it has a correct list of inks. Now, why don't we always do that? Well, the only way to get a correct list of the inks used in a document is by rendering the document and then examining the image that was created. Because you want to make sure that those colors are actually used. If there is no cyan or magenta in the document, then you don't want to have cyan or magenta in your list. So those need to be accurate, and as a result, you need to render the document, and that takes a little bit of time, and that's why we don't want to do this by default. You have to ask for it. So that's ink info. Then you have another one that has to do with ink, and it's called ink coverage. And you might remember something similar from the template reports in pdfToolbox. That's actually exactly the same information. If you want ink coverage information, so what's the percentage of the page where this ink is used? How many square inches or centimeters of in this document use this particular ink? If you want that information, you have to include this node. You can specify what the aperture is, so what the minimum is that we're looking at, and then you can specify what the page box is to calculate ink coverage. And typically you would specify trim box because that's what's supposed to be printed, so you want to calculate the sum of inks inside of the trim box, but you could specify one of the other page boxes in there as well. Then, like I said, you have this hit info, but I'll keep that for the next template. So in this template, we need correct ink information, so we could suffice probably by saying ink info and not bother with the rest. If you also want ink coverage information, then you also need to specify the second XML node in here. So that's the communication that we're doing, the commands that we have for PDF Toolbox. Then we have, where is Sublime? There. Then we have the index.html file, and you'll see that it is actually very, very simple, and that's because this is a completely dynamic thing that we add. We have to look at the inks in there and then put them in there, and that's completely dynamic. So a lot of the work is going to be done in JavaScript, and you can already see that because I include a number of different JavaScripts in here, specifically that file from the temp folder, which is that JSON object I already talked about, and we'll look at that in a second. jQuery, because it's easy to use jQuery, and someone or lots of people actually spend lots of time perfecting that, so why not use it? This is the main script file that I've written to make this template, and then this is a support JavaScript file. And that one was also written by me, but you'll find that in the example snippets that we ship with pdfToolbox. And of course, you're free to use the functionality that you find in there. So you're really looking at one script file that we've written, the information from the document that was gathered by pdfToolbox, and then two support files that we use to make our life easier. That's what we're looking at here. The HTML itself is trivial. There is a div here called ink information, and then in there, well, it has a title basically, and it has an intro text, and that's it. And those are mainly used to style them in the CSS file. So this CSS file contains, if I quickly open that up, this CSS file contains a bunch of font definitions, and then it styles the ink information, title, and intro items. And then you can see that it also contains some additional styles, one for detail name and ink detail color patch. And those aren't in there yet. So that must be something that gets added by JavaScript, I would then guess, but they're also defined in the CSS file already. So the HTML is very, very simple. And I've seen a question, meanwhile, what about resolution? I do believe there is a way to specify resolution. I haven't done it here, but I would assume that it would be the same as what we've used for the template reports in pdfToolbox. And then, is there a list of these XML nodes? So if we're talking about this manifest.xml, is there a list of the nodes that you can use in here? No, at the moment, there is no such list, but it's actually quite simple. You're limited to the information that you see in here. There might be other stuff added over time, but stuff will normally be added, and it's the same principle that we've used for the template reports. If you run into something that is not possible, so if you run into a template that you want to create and you cannot do it because you're missing a piece of information or something like that, then just get in contact with us. We'll see whether that is a use case that we want to support or think we can support inside of place content in pdfToolbox. And if so, we'll add to this list of stuff that you can request. But at the moment, those are the 3 commands that are available inside of manifest.xml. So just look at, for example, the add ink information snippet, and you'll find an example of what it should look like to work. Okay, so we looked at manifest, we looked at index. Now, what I also want to show you is what is inside this DocInfo.js, because it's an important file, and it's hidden behind my GoToWebinar control panel. Let me try that again. Sublime. Okay, this is a very interesting file, but you wouldn't say so if you simply open it up in a text editor, because it's actually quite long, and because it's automatically generated, it doesn't contain any line breaks. But if I go to word wrap, then it still looks annoying, but it becomes better. So this is a JSON object. It's basically a JavaScript object. The object is called DocInfo, and you'll see that we will use that object in a number of different places. And it is an object with different keys inside. For example, it has information about the document, the name, it has the, and I'm just going to insert some line breaks here to make life a little bit easier for you. So it has all of this info, then I need to take this, I need to take number of pages, so ink information, variables, and let's say pages, and we'll stop there. So this object contains a list of information for the document that you are processing. As you can see, the first item that you have here is the name of the document. I processed a document called t.pdf, and because this is automatically generated, pdfToolbox figured out that the name of the document is t.pdf and added that into this DocInfo.js file. It also remembers the path where that file was. It remembers the metadata inside. In this case, there is only a title, and the title is T. So this is basically the metadata that I entered inside of Illustrator in this case. Number of pages in the document is 1. Complete ink information is set to true, and that means that someone using the manifest.xml file requested pdfToolbox to add complete ink information. And while it doesn't look like there is any ink information in here, remember that, again, PDF documents consist of pages, and the ink information obviously can be different from page to page. So that information you'll actually find in here, and that's the pages list. And pages list contains an object for each individual page, and I'm going to hunt for the next one for just a sec. Oh, there is only one page in this document. That's easy then. So this is it. All of this information is the information for one page in the document. You have the media box, you have the trim box, the bleed box, the craw box, the art box. You have the page number, which is 0 in this case, development number, so we start counting at 0. I have an indication of the page label, which is null, so there is no page label for that particular page. And then I have ink information. So you can see that while at the document level it says that there is complete ink information, I then find that ink information for the page that I'm looking at. And the ink information, again, consists of a number of objects, and each object tells me the name of the color, cyan in this example, whether it's how much it's used, so in this case, usage in centimeter is, in square centimeter, actually this is 0, and usage in percentage is 0 as well. So I do get that cyan, magenta, yellow, and black in my list of colors, but it does tell me that it is not used at all. So you get all of that information in that object. And each time that you use the Fixup on a document, pdfToolbox will overwrite Kala's DocInfo.js and pdfchip.log in your HTML folder and give you the latest information. That's why I said, if you want to start developing a template or a snippet from scratch, what you need to do, what the best way to do that is you have an index.html file that is empty or close to empty. You use that in a Fixup. You run that Fixup, and then you get these two files created, and that folder actually created automatically by pdfToolbox. And then you can open this file in a text editor and figure out what kind of information you have in there. Now, if you do the same as what I've done here, and that is reformat this so that you can see what kind of information is in there, remember that the next one that you run the Fixup, it will be overwritten. So simply copy that somewhere else on your desktop or something like that, and then you can reformat it, and it will not get overwritten next time, so that you have to go through this again. Okay, so that's the JSON file, and then if I look very quickly at what we have in the log here. Oh, Sublime doesn't like that one. Okay, we'll take something else then. So if you look at that log, you can see printing, and then it tells you what the HTML file is that it is processing. And then you can also see that it wrote some messages in there. That's not an error, but that's because the template that I was creating at the time automatically output some information, because I wanted to see what I had in terms of information and adjust my JavaScript to that. So that log file, once again, is very useful if you're getting an error message and you want to know why that error was, see whether you had any warnings or errors from pdfToolbox. And it's also very useful if you're writing JavaScript and you're using the log function to output something to this file. Now, let's look at scripts to see how this then happened. how this was created. And the first thing that I have is the script.js file. This is the main script file for my HTML. And well, it's not that long, and that's because all of the complexity is actually in the support file that I have here, and that should make your life a lot easier as well. It's not that long. You can see that it has one function called cchip print loop. If you're familiar with pdfchip or you've looked at pdfchip, then that's exactly the same function that we're using there. So if you specify a JavaScript function called cchip print loop, it will automatically be called by pdfToolbox in this case. And it will automatically be called once your HTML template has been loaded. Okay? So what pdfToolbox will do is load your HTML, and then it calls your JavaScript function, and then you can take action on what needs to happen. And what I do here is actually quite simple. I loop over all pages in the document. It's here, and it starts here. And at the end, when I'm done with a page, I say print pages, and print pages 1 to be specific. Print pages 1, that is not possible in pdfchip at the moment, at least not in version 1 that is shipping. That's an additional parameter that says only output 1 page. So even if I make a mistake in what I'm doing here, and I would end up with something that contains 2 PDF pages for whatever reason, then I only want the first page to be added to my overlaid on my document, actually. So for each page, all of this code is executed. The HTML template is converted into PDF, and then the PDF is generated and added to my original document. Now what happens here, you have this call that says adjust document size to media box. Now remember what I said in my presentation. That's not a presentation, there are 2 strategies here. You can either create a fixed size snippet, and that's very simple. You simply set up something in the page object in your CSS file. That's relatively easy to do. Or you can make a variable size snippet. And if you have a variable size snippet, it means that the snippet size, the size of the PDF file that will be generated, has to be adjusted for each page in the PDF document that you're adding to. If I'm running something on my t.pdf file, then I have to figure out what the size is of that T file, and I have to resize my HTML, set up the HTML in such a way that it fits one-on-one over that page that I'm adding content to. How do you do that? Well, you can try to figure out how to do that yourself, or you can simply use this function, and you can find that function inside of the snippet. And if my GoToWebinar control panel would go out of the way for a second, there we go. So you can simply call that function. It's right here, adjust document size to media box, and that one then sets the page setup in CSS to make sure that your HTML page is exactly the same size as the PDF page you're working with in your original document. So that does all the heavy lifting for you. And what does that mean? Well, it means that afterwards, if you would use CSS to do absolute positioning of objects, and you say you use the right or bottom or top or left specifiers that you have in CSS, then right will actually be right compared to the document, the PDF document you have in there. So if you want to do correct positioning of objects, then the first thing that you have to do, the easiest to make it easy for yourself, is adjust document size to media box. And you have to do that for each page in the document, which is why it's inside of this loop. And then secondly, remember that object that I had in my HTML file. So if I go back to HTML and I look at this object here, ink information, that's the container that I have that will list all of those patches. So what I actually want to do is place that container in a well-defined position in my document. And I know that my document was prepared in such a way that there is space, blank space, on the right-hand side of the document. So what I want to do is take that container and position that in that blank space. And the way I've done that here, again, is relatively easy and is by using position element. And position element lets you specify one or more objects. It lets you specify, and actually let me open again, go to my support file. Here you have position element and the documentation that goes with that. So basically it expects a CSS identifier for one object or multiple objects that you want to move, an anchor point on the element itself, and here I am saying that I want the left top of that container to be anchored in relation to the right top of the media box. That's what I'm saying here. And then I want to add a horizontal offset of 255, which is in points. So I can take any anchor point. This is very much the same way things work in Illustrator. If you look at the anchor points that you can use, you'll see that you have left top, center top, right top, and so on and so on. There's 9 anchor points, and that's the same as you have in Illustrator, for example. And you can actually anchor one of those anchor points of the object that you're positioning to an anchor point of page box that you want. And here I'm using an object in a media box, but I could also do positioning in relation to the bleed box or the art box or the craw box or the trim box, regardless. Any 5 of those will work. So again, you can figure out how to position objects yourself, but in most cases it will be easier to simply use position elements and then use those parameters and skip all of the calculations that you're seeing in here. Some of those are actually quite obvious, but in many cases it's actually not that simple. For example, you can calculate width and height of elements in an HTML file, but you get those in pixels and not in points, and you need them in points to position them correctly in inside of pdfChip and stuff like that. So it can be a little bit confusing what happens here, but that's why you have the support file where everything is done for you. Simply use position element and read what the parameters are that you have to pass to make that happen. So what happens here is that I position that main element in the right spot, in the blank area that I have on my PDF, and then I clear whatever is there. I'm reusing this template for multiple pages, potentially. If my document has multiple pages, then I'm going to reuse the same element, and I want to clear it first of all, and then I'm simply inserting that ink information. And the way I insert that ink information is by inserting divs and paragraphs in here. The div is the actual color patch that you see. The paragraph is then the ink detail that you see. And that again uses information or functions that come from this support file. So again, just take advantage of the support functionality you have there, or at least use this to figure out how to get information from this JSON object that we talked about, and so on. So that's what happens here. It's a relatively short script that runs over these pages and then simply inserts color patches in there. that is at the end converted into a PDF page by pdfToolbox, and then lastly is going to be added on top of my PDF document inside of pdfToolbox. So that's how that one works. And actually, most of the templates that you have in as default templates work in a very similar way. And we're already at 1 hour of webinar, but I want to show you at least one more and explain those last couple of fields that I didn't want to go into detail about. I've also shown this example in the webinar for pdfToolbox 8. So in that webinar, I used a process plan. Let me see if I can do this by not using a process plan, but individual fixups. So what I want is this one, replace name. Replace name is a place content fixup based on the replace recipient name template. And it uses, and I haven't talked about that one so far, it uses this apply to property. And it's a little bit of a misnomer. The name could be better in this case. But it's actually, what happens is that when I specify something here, and this is a list of the pre-flight checks that you have built in pdfToolbox. So when you specify a pre-flight check in here, pdfToolbox will begin by running that pre-flight check before it even starts converting your HTML to PDF. So it first runs this pre-flight check. And the results of that pre-flight check will also end up in the JSON object that we have talked about already. So if I then go back to the snippets and I open up the JSON object, we have the same annoying one-line information here. But if you now look at that, there is one additional item here called, and let me put that on a different line so that you can see clearly what happens here. This is now filled in as well, hits, and it's filled in because we requested that in the manifest file, and because we're using that pre-flight check in the properties of the Fixup. And what that does is it gives you something called hits, and hits is actually a list. That's why you have the square brackets. It's a list because it can have multiple objects. It's actually another square bracket at the end of there here. So it's a list, and in that list, what you have is hit records, and this is one of those records. And that has only one item at the moment called bounding box that gives you the bounding box of the object that was hit. So you specify a pre-flight check in here. pdfToolbox runs the pre-flight check. If the pre-flight check finds any objects that are hit, then it will write the bounding box of those objects inside of that JSON object. And that means that you can use that bounding box in your HTML snippet because you have access to that JSON object. What does that mean? Well, what I'm doing here is I have a detect replacement area checkup, a pre-flight check actually. And that one is developed to detect this large red area that I have in my PDF. And I believe it's done by spot color in this particular case. So this is a red spot color, and I've created a pre-flight check that detects objects using that particular spot color. Now, if I run this, and I add a webinar text in there, you can see that it actually enters that text that I specified, and it enters it centered inside of the bounding box of that red rectangle. Now, this text is not absolutely positioned. If I would move this red rectangle to somewhere else in my PDF document, it would still end up being centered inside of that red rectangle. And of course, in the demo that I showed for the introduction webinar, I then ran a second Fixup. So those were part of a process plan, and that second Fixup removed that red rectangle. So the idea is that you can create a PDF file with a number of template areas in there, variable areas if you want, identified with a spot color or in some other way. And pdfToolbox runs the Preflight check that detects these areas, puts some information in there, and then you run a second Fixup that removes those temporary objects from the document. And this can be a way in a variable data workflow to create a template that has some objects where variable text needs to be positioned, and then use that information to afterwards dynamically insert the text and or other content where you want to insert it into the document. Okay, now, how does that work? I've almost explained all of it, and if you were able to follow the ink information template, then this one will be very similar. So again, we have the manifest which requests from pdfToolbox that it includes this hit info in the JSON object. That's the third one that I didn't talk about yet. And because we do that, our JSON object contains that information inside, and that's why we have this hits item here with that bounding box. And then in the index.html file, we play the same trick as before. The index file is very simple. I simply have variable name in there and nothing else. And in my script, I do something very similar. I run over all pages in here, and then for each page, I get the variable element from my HTML file, and then I get the value of that from my JSON object. And again, you can figure out how to do that, or you can simply use the support file, and that support file also has functionality to do that. So you have functionality here to get that list of hits from the JSON object, to see how many hits there are, if you have any, and then you also have functionality in here to, where is the information section here? You also have information to request what the value is of a particular variable in there by name. So because I know that the variable that we've used was var name, I get that information from there, and then we actually go through the hits. If there is a hit, we use the first one, and then we have some positioning to put that new text that I'm adding centered in the bounding box of that template. So it's very similar to what you saw before, and the way these two snippets have been built is actually a quite easy way to build those. If you use this support file that is shipped with that, with those default snippets, so simply copy that from one of the default snippets, and that will give you a lot of information or a lot of functionality that you can simply use in your own HTML snippets that prohibits you from having to reinvent the wheel every time you do that. Okay, so to wrap up, because I'm already over time here, and if there are any more questions than the ones I've already answered, then now would be a really good time to add those to your GoToWebinar control panel. But to wrap up, what we've talked about is a new and a flexible way to add content to PDF documents. And that can be very easy, or it can be relatively complex. Easy if you use one of the first 3 fixups to add text, page numbers, or barcodes. Relatively complex if you decide that you want to or need to write your own HTML snippet. The technology that is used, as we've seen again, is the PDF chip engine that is also used for the template reports. And the techniques there, the manifest.xml, the information that is written into JSON, all of those things will also seem very familiar if you've either used PDF chip already or you've used the HTML template reports in pdfToolbox 7 already. And I think the most important point of the last part of the demo of the place content fixup itself is that don't try and reinvent everything from scratch. Use one of the pre-built templates and do your advantage by using the that support file, that support JavaScript that has a lot of information on positioning objects, changing the HTML page size to match the PDF, getting all kinds of information from that JSON object, and that will make your life a lot easier while you're developing these. Now, it's not trivial by far to develop these. If you want to do something, you don't know how to get started, or you simply want to talk that through, talk to us, don't hesitate. We'll be very happy to answer questions about that. Of course, what we will not do is write a complete template from scratch for you, but we actually will do that, but then it is professional services, or we can get you in contact with a partner who can do that for you as well. So don't think too easily that what you want to do is not possible. There's a lot of very flexible things that you can do with this new functionality. Just ask the question to either one of our partners or to us directly, and we will be more than happy to add or to help you with that. You can always use support@4ps.com or info@4ps.com. You also have my direct email address here if you want to add an additional question. One more question that I can see in here: can we customize the path where the JSON result is saved? No, at the moment you cannot. That is something that for the XML report you could do with the HTML template reports in pdfToolbox 7 and 8. But at the moment, for the JSON file, that's not possible. It will always appear in the location that I highlighted during the demo. So that folder, CalAsTemp, is always automatically created, and these 2 files will always be automatically created inside of there as well. That's not something you can change at the moment. Okay, that's it for today. I can see that most people stayed until the end. I hope that means that it didn't get too technical and you could follow. Like I said, if there is something that you didn't get or you have additional questions, just get in touch and we'll be more than happy to help. The only thing that is that I have to do now is to thank you very much for joining yet another summer school webinar. This was the 4th one. There are 2 more that I will do, and then 2 others that I believe Tom will do in end of August. The next one is, if I'm not terribly mistaken, talks about IC3D Suite again, so the 3D visualization application for all kinds of packaging. And in fact, it will talk about a number of advanced techniques such as lighting and how that can be influenced. And that should be, if you are interested in the IC3D Suite or in packaging visualization in general, should be very, very interesting. If you decide to enlist for that webinar, it would be good if you have some understanding of what IC3D Suite is. I will not have time during the webinar to start from scratch on that one. We'll focus on a number of advanced techniques. On our website, you'll find a bunch of recordings from previous webinars, and there are a number of IC3D Suite webinars. If you haven't worked with the application, if you haven't done a trial or something like that, take the time to go watch one of those recordings before you join next week's webinar. Next week is again on Wednesday, 4 p.m., and I hope to see many of you there for that one as well. Have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.